obviously the little girl. Okay, there's some shots of her playing on the beach. There's a concerned mother. She's running into the water. Our job is basically to take what's already there on the film and enhance it, to ramp up the emotion so that people are interested in the story and get caught up in the story a little bit more than they normally would if the music wasn't there. Now I add some weird sounds here. My name's Lenny Williams, and I write music for nonfiction television. Well, I won 4 Emmy Awards in the last 5 years. First was for a hippo show. The next one was Hornets from Hell. And last year and the year before, there was a show about the Arctic called On Thin Ice. And then last year was Deadly Love, about spiders and spider sex. Okay, here is the part after she's been attacked, or she's racing to the shore. And here's the part where she's collapsed on the beach. I'm here at my workspace, and I have what I like to call the cockpit, where I have computer screens in front of me. I have a piano keyboard controller to the left of me where I play the notes, and I have hardware samplers behind me. I keep the tension going here because we're not sure whether she's going to make it or not. One must have a solid understanding of a lot of musical genres and styles, and that's the key to being able to do this job, is because you don't know what you're going to be faced with. I'm a classically trained composer. I went to the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore, Maryland, and when I studied composition, I learned about structures and forms of 19th century music and what most laymen call classical music. When I was in college studying composition, my goal then was to be this famous classical music composer and win a Pulitzer Prize, and I think that was every student's goal where I went to school. Then I started playing jazz at night, and I fell in love with the idea of me playing in jazz clubs and being a jazz player.
Lenny Williams.
They call it Stormy Monday.
As I'm playing around town, I met a recording engineer named Chris Biondo. His girlfriend was Eva Cassidy. I just met Eva Cassidy, and she just started to record, and then she was doing an album with Chuck Brown, who I had known as a kind of a DC go-go legend.
I feel like busting loose, give me the break now. I feel like busting loose.
His idea at the time was he was going to move away from his hardcore go-go thing and do a jazz thing. So he wanted me to be his jazz guy. We tried some jazz gigs, and I played on some go-go gigs. But the fact of the matter is, Chuck is right where he belongs with go-go music. So it was a pretty good life. But after about 10 years of that, I thought if I ever play in one more jazz club again, I got to think of something else to do, you know. So then I started playing in the pit orchestras in the Kennedy Center and the Warner Theater. So later, when I was presented with an opportunity to write music for TV, I kind of drew on that education to help me.
An animal without a brain is taking over the oceans.
They send me a DVD of different cuts of the film. They kind of melt that down into what they call a rough cut. When they send us these, usually has a few music tracks that they've already laid in to give us an idea of what tone that they want. And we kind of pick up on that tone, and that's where we start writing from.
The northern shores of Australia.
This is a show about jellyfish, and this is a particular scene as they want to demonstrate how jellyfish are dangerous. Normally, I would start by watching the scene, deciding when I want the music to start, and at certain points you want to ramp up the intensity, and obviously when she is attacked by the jellyfish, you want to have a dramatic moment. So I would start by picking a sound out of the sounds that I have. I would think I need something ominous, slightly neutral, and I'd pick it out. Maybe something like this. I have a thing called a metronome, a click track. This allows me to sync everything up to a master clock, so to speak. So that to me says slightly ominous, something's going to happen, but we're not sure yet. So here I would add a little piano. This could create a little tension for where the girl is entering the water. Okay, here we have the little girl running into the water with her little flotation ring, and she's in the water floating, and we see some other shots of jellyfish and their stingers in the water. We see close-ups of the jellyfish stingers, and then we see the girl being attacked and screaming and splashing around. She's staggering toward the shore while people are helping her, and now she's laying on the shore. People are running over to her, and then an ambulance comes, and they attempt to revive her. It's kind of a long process. A cue that's as long as this, cue meaning a piece of music, which is about 2 minutes long, would probably take me maybe 3 hours to create. Right around the time that people started making movies, almost at the same time, people wanted music with their pictures. And piano players sat in the movie theaters and played these things. And you've heard this stuff before. It sounds a little bit like this. And that's kind of where modern film music is sprung from. With Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom or Jacques Cousteau, if they were in Africa, you might hear something like this. Then we started in the 80s, there was this big push to promote world music. Some producers like you to be regionally specific. So if you're in Australia, they like to hear Australian instruments. If you're in Africa, they want to hear African instruments. Because I do so many of these shows, a lot of the same scenes and with the same sequence events come up, and you're constantly faced with the challenge of creating the same emotional outcome musically with different techniques. So a typical thing would be what we call a predatory scene, where an animal wants to eat another animal and he's chasing the other animal. If we're in Africa and it's a lion, we'll go with African drums and we'll have them go quickly, like this. You can't do that every time, so you might mix it up and have an African kalimba, which is a thing that makes pitched instruments. And I can give you a couple examples. Other ways you can vary the scene is what you add to these basic patterns that you put down to describe running. You may put a high note in, a scary note in, an effect, a symbol when they catch their prey. And at the beginning, I'll put a cymbal swell in to say something new's happening and it's real exciting and you should watch. I have a different boss on every project, so I've learned how to communicate with bosses that don't necessarily know how to communicate with me. Sometimes we get things like, I want the score to be very orange. Well, in a situation like that, when I have a new producer and I feel like, okay, they don't communicate well musically, I'll try to get them to come out here to the studio and sit with me, and I'll play them stuff and say something like this. And usually through a couple hours I can discern what they like and what they don't like. There's a lot of tricky scenes, and some of the hardest scenes to do are what we call emotionally neutral scenes. Scenes that aren't happy, aren't sad, aren't scary, aren't tense. When you hear certain music, you feel certain things. So to write music that doesn't feel anything is sometimes the hardest thing to do. So say, I mean, this typically comes up a lot in science shows. So science cues tend to not be a minor chord, not be a major chord. They tend to be chords that leave out the defining note of what major and minor is. So you might have something like this. A lot of what I do in this job depends on my ability to be able to say, okay, what would the average person watching TV feel if they saw this? The music just needs to enhance what's there and bring the picture to life. So if I was going to map out the lion chase scene on the piano, it might sound something like this.